What I want you to do, so one of the biggest values, I think, is when you get a chance to talk and ask good questions. We want to be able to answer your questions, but this is what I want you to do, because at least from what I understand, those who are gathered here right now are people that are either have an idea, maybe they're a little bit closer to either the start of this, or you think you might be, or maybe you're in the midst of it already. And so what I want you to do is I actually just want you to take about 5 minutes, and I want you to talk at your table about where you are in this kind of like, in this whole process. Like, I've tried something and it's just tanked, or at least I think it did, or I have this idea. And what I really want you to come up with from talking with the people, talking to one or two other people, is I want you to come and say, these are some of the biggest hurdles, these are some of the biggest challenges that I have right now. And I would love for Matt and myself just to be able to wrestle with those with you, because I want you to be able to take some very practical tools away from today. We want to remove as many cows from the train tracks as possible. You know what I mean when I say that? Like, if you're on a train and there's a cow in front of you, you can't keep going. You got to stop the train, you got to take the cow off the train track, and you got to keep going. That's a farm joke for Matt. And so anyway, so take about 5 minutes. I just want you, and as honest as you want to be, get together. Where are you? What major hurdles, major obstacles are right in front of you? And please bring those questions, write it down. I'm going to come and collect those questions from you. Matt and I are going to take some time and really wrestle that with you. I have some more content after that. I have a couple of questions up here. If you have a card, can you lift it high in the air and I'll come grab it real quick? Matt, can I invite you back up to the stage, please?
I'm not quite sure it's a question.
Okay, that's fine.
Funny thing is,
Cool. Any others? Great. Thanks. Okay, that might not make sense. Haha, I love it. Ooh, paddle and ponder. All right. So one of the really helpful things for me is when I can get practical, and the end of the day we're going to be getting into. Sure, thank you so much. Okay, so I really want to answer some direct questions because a lot of having the theoretical knowledge and is really helpful, but then when it gets down to like leaving this place feeling like we have a step or two that we can really take, again, if we can help at all remove one of those cows, or like we've helped move like a cow slightly off the train track for you, it might make it a little bit easier for you to finish that process. So I don't know if we'll have time to get all these. I actually allotted a decent amount of time to really for this moment right here, and so let's dig in a little bit. Do you see one immediately that you want to start with?
Yeah, I don't want.
All right, let's start right here. All right. This card says, I started a fresh expression without realizing it was a fresh expression. Paddle and ponder. It's only seasonal, paddling only in summer. How do you keep something going when it's only seasonal? How do you expand / inspire others to help with the leadership and growth? So that's a great question. And so paddling and pondering, I absolutely love it. So is that canoeing? Kayaking, canoeing, yeah. So we would just tell you you need to move south. So there's a couple of different ways that I think that this can happen. I mean, first of all, when you started this, I have a question. Did you start it really in having those people that are part of it feeling like this is their church?
No, I just saw that, our church is
outdoors thing. Why don't we do something
Right.
to reach some people and maybe connect?
Yeah, so there's a couple of different answers. So as far as like the larger, like if we were to say like worship gathering, there's increasingly in North America more and more places that they're actually only doing what we would call corporate worship, maybe once or twice a month. For different reasons, because the other times that they're together, they're actually doing worship, but just in different ways. And so I think that might be part of it, as well as you're paddling and pondering. So for other seasonal times, is it possible to cross-country ski and ponder? Or to do different outdoor activities in order for that to happen. I would start asking myself, if we have a group that is starting to identify this as their church, that they perhaps feel like this is deeply meaningful to them, how can we really start exploring those other seasons in a way, whether it's maybe you're just getting together in more of a traditional way and building up to that season, or how do we live out all of those seasons in one of those ways, but maybe with a little bit less pressure than every week we have to be doing like worship. Do you have anything to add on to that?
No, that's good.
Is that helpful?
Yeah.
Any more questions along with that?
Well, currently, I started out just once a month during the summer.
Okay.
So it wasn't even once a week.
Yeah.
And I started it before I even heard about Fresh Expressions.
Great.
So,
That's awesome. That's really awesome. Yeah, I would ask the question, especially if there's people finding meaning in that. I would ask the question if maybe it's too cumbersome to get together for like paddling every like week, or maybe even every other week. I would start asking the question, what does it mean for this community to gather in whatever way, slightly more frequently? Whether it's just for like a barbecue or whatever, just to continue fostering that community and building it up as such. That's where I would be if I were you.
And making sure that it sounds like you started it without, it sounds almost more like by default you kind of bumped into this, which is great. But I would say now just seeking with intentionality of how will we move forward. Like just asking the question that it's not a default, but with intentionality somewhere we want to go, I think that alone will help you, just so you don't get stuck, that it remains just at the activity.
Now, are you a pastor? You are a pastor. Okay, cool. So, yeah, that opens up some unique opportunities and possibilities inside of that too. There's actually a kayaking church in North Carolina that you may have come across. Have you seen that? Okay.
I've seen the video, yeah.
Yeah, so like they have a pretty cool example that way. So really you have the ability inside of like the kind of the base that you have to really build it in a pretty cool way. I think inviting into the vision, maybe there are other people in your congregation that basically just ask the question, what would it look like for this to become church? If you were to put that out there, say, I do this with a group of people that find this very meaningful. I believe there are other people that would also find this meaningful. And then I love the quote, good leadership is inviting into a vision. If you put that vision, you invite them into that process, what would it look like? This already exists for this to become church, for us to see it that way. That's really where I would be going.
Some of the questions up here relate to, one of them is how to find pioneers and then encourage them if they're struggling with self-doubt. You would also ask the question, John, about finding leaders and growth, to help them grow if you're not the one to continue to lead it. I think there's some overlap there. One is, I often, just from my own language, talk about finding shining eyes, like just those people who get it, whatever that may mean. I know that's not the most, what does that mean? Like they get it. Like you can just tell when you look at them, they get it, that then you follow up with them. So one of the things I didn't say earlier, I asked you all to be thinking about your pioneers, your supporters, your permission givers. I said be intentional to follow up with them. I did not say how to follow up with them. You can do that how you want, but for me, part of what that means is that I think there's such power when you see someone that you think this gift is within, even if they don't see it, to literally seek them out and sit down with them at a breakfast or whatever and just say to them, I see these gifts in you, and I wonder if you've ever thought about this, and would you partner with me or our church or in this significant way? The worst thing that's going to happen out of that conversation is them looking at you saying, thanks, but no thanks, but they will have felt affirmed because you recognized them, you took time to invest in them, and you recognized their gifts and lifted that up. That's the worst thing that's going to happen. They actually may turn and look at you and be like, oh, okay, or tell me more. Or maybe the Spirit, us United Methodists, Prevenient Grace, was working ahead of time and the person's like, yes, I am ready to go. But it takes that intentionality on our part to have the conversation and say, I see this within you, whether they see it or not, and would you be willing to join with me in this way? That has been a primary way. I also know for Mitch, and I'll let him speak more to it, and some of the ones pioneering, some of the fresh expression groups we have going on, Mitch has helped start them, but he's been super intentional from moment one to be looking and seeing who has leadership gifts, who is super passionate about this, and at the right time, they're doing, Mitch is doing it, they're watching, then they're going to do it together, then they're doing it, Mitch is watching, and now he's letting them go. That awareness from the beginning will help us find pioneers, even if they don't see it in themselves.
Yeah. And we ask this, so the next part of this is this, it says, number 2, encourage them in their self-doubt. Whoever wrote this, would you be willing potentially, and you don't have to like elaborate a little bit on like where you're seeing that?
Sure, I wrote that one. I just find at our church we have people are full of good ideas for fresh expression.
Uh-huh.
I don't know if you get that at first, but Mitch, you should start this. You're like, that's a great idea, but I think God's calling you to start. And instantaneously the response is, oh no, not a chance. There's a door closed there.
Yeah. I don't know. Do you have a track record of doing it? If they say, have you ever done that? I don't know if I have a track record of ever doing that.
I don't think so.
Okay, then I don't really. I understand. Like it's that that triangle of like, here's the idea, here's Drew, and then go do it. And like you're like, remove me, and let's just have you. Here's the idea, go do it. And so that's a kind of a typical like church problem that we'll run into. And so, and you said there's self-doubt. Like they just don't think that they are personally capable of doing that. Okay, all right, that makes a little bit of sense. So they see part of what that means, and I was potentially going to get into this a little bit later, is that a huge aspect and one of the biggest barriers in fresh expressions. It's over here.
I'll get it.
I got it. One of the biggest barriers in fresh expressions is closing something we call the leadership gap. And so the leadership gap is basically here's laity and here's clergy. And over here we have consuming, and over here we have responsibility, leadership and responsibility. And so over time, basically there's become this gap of leadership and responsibility, which is really meant if you really have any say inside of your church, you're clergy. And then if you're laity, that just means that you're here to consume. And we've lived into that. So I think part of what you're experiencing is this very large leadership gap. And what we are trying to do is shrink it. Now, one of the reasons I lift up that I'm not clergy is actually for this reason, to show people you don't have to be a pastor to step out and do this work. In fact, if you are the pastor doing this and you're the only person doing this, what example you are actually setting for the rest of your congregation is that in order to do a fresh expression, you have to be an ordained pastor. And so I'm not saying you shouldn't if you're a pastor. What I am saying is that we need examples of both laity and pastors doing it. And so I think that that might be part of it, is that for them to understand that actually as laity, we need to be, or in us as staff members or clergy, we need to be actively shrinking this leadership gap where we don't have as much responsibility. We actually don't have as much decision-making power as sometimes we think that we should, but actually it's the laity, which is biblical that we're supposed to be equipping the saints to do ministry, right? Not the ones just doing ministry and then having them partake of it. That's not what God has called us into. But we live in a society where, so my father's a pastor. He was offered a job at a church. They said, we can't wait for you to come in and turn this church around. He declined that position. He's Presbyterian. Because he was like, if you're kind of kidding yourself if you think I'm going to be the one. If you're not already willing to do the work, then we're not going to go very far. It's not going to be a superhero pastor that comes in and saves the day, right? But so I would say one more thing about that is that what that means for you, if you find yourself in that clergy or that leadership role where you have a lot of leadership, a lot of responsibility, what does it look like for you to let go of some of that? And if you are laity, what does it mean for you to live into the reality that the same Holy Spirit that has been given to Matt has been given to me as well? It's not a different Holy Spirit. Same Holy Spirit has been given to both of us, and we are all being called into this work together.
One other piece of that I think relates to a couple of these questions is it took us a while, but in our setting, we've developed, we call it disciples' journey. And it was our way of, it's 4 steps, but so steps 1 and 2 would be for me what I see in most churches. Step 1 is joining. Step 2 then is about discovering your gifts and abilities and where you're going to plug in. Kind of what Mitch said earlier, if you're going to help the average person in church take their next step of discipleship, what will that be? Our steps 1 and 2 do that. Where it begins to change, though, is we've added 2 other steps on, 3 and 4, which are, 1 is about embracing your call, whatever that is, and then the step 4 is setting them free to live into that call. And I share all of that to say, people who are going through that, we're trying to help them understand, number 1, to be a disciple of Christ is that they don't just give it to the laity or the leadership, they're going to own it, but that increasingly we are going to empower them to do that. And so what's happening is, you can imagine, it's kind of like a funnel. We have the most people at step 1 joining the church. Then a smaller group are willing to discover what their gifts and abilities are, but not everyone. Then a smaller group from that is willing to embrace that gift and start to live it out. And then an even smaller group is willing to be set free and really, like Mitch said, be empowered to go and live out this. I share that because some of our people who get to that last stage, they will go into children's ministry in some regard, but some of them are simultaneously being set free with Mitch to be leaders in the Acts network. So we have a group right now. We're in the middle of our step 3. We don't know for sure, but Mitch has 3 or 4 potential people who there's a decent likelihood will be new leaders by the time we get here. So that's one of the ways we're trying to address that leadership gap that he's talking about. And at the same time, we lift this up all the time, or increasingly at our church, trying to change the culture from this consumeristic mindset. And again, it's kind of back to the ape and the shepherd and teacher thing. We get spiritually obese, and we've got to change that.
Yeah. Is that helpful? Cool.
Eric.
So if you don't have people stepping up or saying, yes, I'll do that, I've heard some people say, well, then the pastor needs to step in, or do you wait and not blame?
This is a question for you.
If you couldn't hear Eric, so if people are not willing to step up, what do you do? Does the pastor do it, or do you wait? Is that what you said? Whichever one you can better live with. I think it depends sort of on your personality and wiring. So, so we all know this as pastors, but laity too. Our plates are all full. And so there's a question in here about how do you add one more thing to your plate? And so part of me wants to say, this can't be just another program and responsibility we add on. It really has to become a way of life so that it's literally woven into who we are and what we do. I also think that we all choose our priorities. And so if this is something that's weighing heavily on our heart, I'll speak for me personally, I don't know that I could just wait it out. I mean, that's just my personality. I'm not saying it should be yours. But I will also say this, if I'm at my breaking point, it would not be wise for me then to add this on top of it. What I think I would probably do is say, I think this is pretty important. I think it's vital for our church and our future. I will find 2 or 3 other things to let go first so that I can live more fully into this. That is my personality. If you are praying and you don't feel like God is leading you in that direction, then I would say keep on praying and trust that God is going to raise up the right person. But I think between praying, between preaching, between sitting down with 50 people and asking and talking and saying, I see this within you, I think that there's just going to come a point where it's incredibly unlikely that there's not somebody else that God has put there with you. If it's a church of 50 and you find one other person, that's one other person that can walk with you. I just believe that. I mean, I think that God is stirring and moving, and I think that a lot of times we're really busy, we're really busy, but I think a lot of times I think we as pastors can hide behind our busyness and use that as an excuse to not do some of the things that need to be done. I'm just going to say that. So.
Good job. All right.
No.
I'm not adding on to that. All right, so, nope, not me. All right, how do we encourage more church people getting involved into organizing a fresh expression? I mean, you're the one that works with all the church people all the time. I mean,
thank you
all
so
right,
much.
let's go.
I will say this. I think that we've talked about it some, but I mean, I think that I think we're preaching it. I think we're encouraging it every place that we can publicly. I think that we're one-on-one. So here's the other thing for me. I think as pastors, gosh, we are given voice everywhere in the setting that we're in. So if we're preaching it or we're leading a Bible study and we're meeting people one-on-one and we're talking at our ad council and we're talking at SPRC and we're talking at trustees about it, I think we underestimate the amount of influence that we have. So we can do that at every stage of the way, and it takes time, but eventually I think as we keep doing that,
yeah.
God will honor that.
Yeah, so one of the things that Matt does, Matt Lake may have Matt Laked you in the past. I'm going to tell you how Matt Lakes people, okay? And he's brilliant at, you know what you do.
I don't know what he's talking about.
You know what you do. And so you have been Matt Laked when 6 months ago he introduces some idea, and then 6 months later you're like, hey, you come to him and you're like, did you think of this? And he just goes, I never thought of that in my life. And so one of the things that he does is he'll introduce a concept like fresh expressions, and he'll hit it pretty hard at the start. He'll back off, and then a little bit. Do you have it mapped out? Did you write out how to do this? And so like 6 or 8 weeks later, he'll softly hit it again. He'll back off. He'll come back in and hit it hard again, and then he'll just wait. And then someone will come to him and say, I have the best idea since sliced bread. And then he'll say, go run with it. And so it's a really wonderful way. And so there's a lot of great stuff in there, is that I think inside of that, he is inviting you into a vision. He's not telling you this has to happen, but he's basically laid it in front of you. So one of the things that we have to understand is that church people don't want to be told what to do. You probably know this. Nobody wants to be told what to do, right? Especially when it kind of bucks up against how they've experienced church for a long time, right? In their tradition, their heritage. And so one of the things that we can do is that it's not a top-down pursuit. We can't just go and from the top and from the pulpit and say this is what has to happen and expect that to work. I guarantee it won't work. You have to also, at the same time, be meeting one-on-one with people, inviting people to dream with you, get to know their souls, what they love in the world. And that's what Matt is really good at doing, is he's able to hit both of these sides and be patient in that pursuit. And so that really helps church people get involved in the long run when you're doing both of those things.
For me, I keep said it a couple times, but to me that's that macro micro approach. Like you're doing it up front, public voice, but you're also underneath one-on-one digging like crazy.
Yeah.
The other thing is I appreciate Jim Collins' work, and he talks a lot about the flywheel concept. And so you just keep coming back to this stuff over and over and over, and then over and over and over again. And
Right.
I think that's helpful.
Sweet. Next question. This is a great question. Do Fresh Expressions replace other ministries, i.e. food pantry, clothing giveaway, etc.? My answer to that is maybe. So sometimes there are great ministries that you are doing that if we're completely honest with ourselves, probably don't have a whole lot to do with ultimately with discipleship. It's a good pursuit, it's a good endeavor, but maybe you've been doing it for 12 years, and we can ask ourselves the question, or we can be honest with ourselves and saying, I'm not so sure this is really taxing, it's really wearing our church down, we're not really able to talk to people about faith, and we haven't been able to for 12 years. And so it might be an opportunity to reassess and say, okay, well, what could we be doing? It could also mean that one of those ministries could kind of evolve a little bit in order for it to take on a slightly different shape. So like maybe the ministry that you're doing could still be meeting that need, but maybe it could be done in a slightly different way where it turns into more of a fresh expression. I think that at any point, and at First Church we talk about it, at any point, any ministry, it should be under, kind of evaluation of whether it's really being effective or not. And if we're not able to do that, that's going to limit us being able to create different pursuits. Did I miss anything?
That was good.
Cool.
I think this is a great question. People have busy schedules, not able to participate. How do you deal with that, and how do you deal with the money issue? For the first part of that, I think one of the greatest strengths of Fresh Expressions is, as we've said, they get into the niches of our society and our rhythms. So Sunday morning, for many people, even if they have to work, they can't come Sunday morning to our gathered worship at that point. So this allows us with smaller groups to actually meet anytime, anywhere. We have a group right now, Mitch helped get started. It's a group of younger families. Traditionally in our church, it was Wednesday nights when the small groups used to meet. And for a variety of reasons, at the time that occurred, it just didn't work for some of our younger families. And so now they meet in a home on Tuesday night. They have dinner together. Their kids are all together doing things. And it's worked out way better because that group could decide on their time and their rhythm what worked. And they all have kids in a similar age range. So they found a similar rhythm that they could live into. It's working out great. On the money thing, I would want us to be careful. I think we're a little bit of an exception here. You don't have to have somebody on staff doing Fresh Expressions. The reason that we do is because it's just a way for us to increasingly live into this and to maximize the opportunities we have there. But you don't have to spend money for a staff position on this, and most of them can be relatively financially not too heavy. So for us right now, like on Wednesday nights, we have a meal thing at the church too. Most of that cost is covered because we now partner with the local food bank. I mean, they literally take 80 to 90% of our expenses with that. You can find other creative partnerships. You've heard Kay talk about the possibility for micro grants if you fill out the application. Like, money doesn't have to be an obstacle hardly at all. So I just wanted to mention that.
Yeah, cool. So I'm going to ask this person if they're willing to elaborate a little bit. How do you overcome the stigma of putting yourself in places where non-Christians are?
So I wrote that one.
Yeah, sure.
And I hang out with the kids, so I'm just, if we go to the playground where there's a lot of Somali, population, and we're just loving them and being there. And then, we have a lot of traditionalists in your church, and I don't know.
So my answer might be different than his. I would say just do it and just like maybe read them some scripture if you have a chance to.
Staff,
What's that?
but being on staff, are you more accountable to what you're?
I,
Does it make sense? I don't know.
Accountable. So, like, is this
Like,
it's a
if you just do
safety
it,
question?
If you just say, I'm just gonna do it,
I,
then
so,
I guess you have your buffer, right? You got the person around you that's going to deflect.
Sure, yeah. I mean, and that's part of that. I mean, obviously, and especially when it comes to minors or, at-risk adults, I think that there is a different level of sensitivity that needs to be had just for that sake alone. And so that there will be different channels that you really need to get approved with. But I think with enough just conversations and with explaining like why you're doing what you're doing, and then how it's safe, if it really is the safety aspect that we really want to be careful of. As long as those things are normally like thought through, I would say at the end of the day, if you've done those things, if you've explained, if you've made sure safety is taken care of, that you have that the church knows what you're doing. At the end of the day, if all of those things are lined up, then I would say just go for it.
I agree. Yeah.
I build off that a little.
Sure, yeah.
The stigma of having people not assume you're going to debate and switch. Like,
Not assume.
not assuming, because I feel like so often in our culture, you start talking, oh, well, what do? You just in that getting to know people. Like as soon as, you throw out you're a pastor, you work at a church, there's already this assumption thrown out. And so, yeah, just how do you
Yeah, it's a great question. I was having some slides about. So, all right, that'll be good. I'm gonna, if we have some more time, I'm going to get to the rest of these questions. But this was really good. This is a good transition moment too. Yeah, very good. That is really good. Thanks. So, with fresh expressions, there's three primary ways that we see them forming or taking shape. Now, the first is what I would call, or what we would call, from the start. From the start, you're very upfront of what you're doing, who you are, but in addition to that, from the start, you're actually exploring discipleship. So an example of this would be Yoga Church. Yoga Church from the start says, hey, we're going to be doing something that's different, but we're going to be doing it, really revolving around yoga. So when you come into this experience, this is going to be more of like a Christian church experience this way. And so where we can explore the Christian faith, but right from the beginning, that there's no bait and switch, because immediately, boom, people understand. Or, hey, we're paddling and pondering about the Christian faith. Please come and join us. If you're at all interested, you love being on the water, you love nature, and maybe you're interested a little bit of who this Jesus person is. So right from the beginning of that, you have an ability to, kind of not bait and switch just immediately with that. The second is what we would call organic growth. And so you heard me say before that fresh expressions you're more like a gardener than you are an architect. And so with organic growth, it's as that body, as that garden grows, you're being attentive to it to when the entirety of that is ready to basically move to the next place of discipleship or heightening. And so an example of that would be, so someone named Shannon Kaiser shares this story, and there's a church or a person that started going to a bar at 11 o'clock at night, and started forming relationships there, and kind of had these solve the world problems, get to know this crew of people that were interested in just talking about life and enjoying each other's company. So this pastor started going there, and at the beginning it was not a Christian endeavor. And so over time, they built these relationships, and then there was a moment where one of those members actually suddenly passed away. When that person passed away, that entire group came and approached this pastor and said, would you be willing to do the funeral arrangements? We don't know how to do that. It's actually pretty expensive. Could you help us out? So obviously he said, of course, I'd be happy to. And so for the funeral, everybody showed up to the church. And previously those people weren't going to the church. They showed up to the church, and the next meeting they had, the pastor felt like it was appropriate to ask the question, do you think, I would love to talk to you about faith. We've been through this together, and we've known each other. For tonight, do you think it'd be okay for us to open the Bible? I'd love to talk to you about how I kind of wrestle and how I understand death. To which they said yes. It was at that moment that he was a gardener, that he was paying attention to the context for the kind of this opening moment, where no one was like, no, wait a second, I have no interest in doing that. But this person had built that relationship. After that happened, they started having these conversations, and slowly they started giving. They started putting money in a wine bottle. And then about a month after, they went out and broke the wine bottle open to see how much money they had collected to help people get their GEDs. And so all of a sudden, they were exploring giving, they were studying scripture, they were sharing about life, talking about death, and it wasn't a bait and switch because this person was attentive to the growth of that. The last is what I call is creating opt-in or opt-out opportunities. So the Pajama Factory is actually a good example of this. So Pajama Factory is, we've told you, hey, we're going to be clear about who we are, which I think is important. We're never going to be like Christian ninjas trying to hide in the shadows or something. But we're going to be clear about who we are, but we really want to build up this community. But over time, what we can create, what we can offer are opportunities that they can actually opt into or they can opt out of. And it's important that when we create those opportunities, that if they opt out, it doesn't impact the community that has been built. So if on Monday night we have like a Bible conversation afterwards, and most of the people don't show up and they come back the next week and we give them a hard time about it, guess what we've done? Messed up a whole lot of stuff and actually shown them that that was a bait and switch, right? That ultimately what we really wanted from them was something else other than caring about eating with them, right? And knowing their names. And so it's at that moment that we can prove to them, hey, it's okay. We're still going to be doing this, but you have every right, and we love you in spite of it. We would really love for you to come, but that's okay. Or maybe you're at a pub and you're drinking some beer with some people, and you're saying, I'm going to get there. We've been doing this. I'm going to get there half an hour early, and I'm going to invite people. And if they show up, great. If not, we're just going to continue doing what we're doing. Fill in the blank. So I think creating appropriate opt-in or opt-out experiences can really help us steer away from these bait and switch aspects. Let me pause. Does that make sense? Do you have any questions along those lines? It's getting late. Your brains have been moving. So one of the things that I want to be clear about is each one of these strategies, there's not one that's better than the other. There's not one that's more right. I would just say it's more right by reading your context. So with Yoga Church, I think that makes perfect sense. It also couldn't. I mean, with a dinner church model, sometimes dinner church could be immediately like exploring discipleship, sharing a little bit of who Jesus is, a testimony, a story. That can be entirely appropriate, but as I shared upstairs, we didn't do it because we knew from the get-go that the artists here said, we're not going to come if you do a sermon. And so we were very conscientious, and so we said, all right, well, instead of doing it from the start here, let's over time, after we've built up a community of people, let's eventually create an opt-in or an opt-out experience. Groovy?
So do you just at your dinner one night say, hey, next week, it's sort of like an informal announcement, or just flyers?
Well, so we're actually still exploring. I mean, so one of the ways we've created the opt-in or opt-out in that time are the conversation tables that we've done. And so that's a way that if they come and they don't want to sit at this table, but they want to talk about computer programming, they can do that. But when we get to the point, because we haven't done afterwards yet, or we haven't done a worship, we'll probably do like a little flyer, or we'll do an announcement. Yeah, we'll invite people. Absolutely. Does that answer your question about the yeah? I'm true. I do, just from experience, because that used to kind of wrestle with me too. Again, time and time again, I've learned that people aren't opposed to, like, when I tell them I'm a Christian. I think that's something that actually probably Christians carry around a little bit more than we ought to. I think that if we're just clear about who we are and we just show that we love people and we don't force anything on them. And Todd is like the perfect example of that. I mean, Todd's like a brother to me, and he's like, yeah, like, you're doing great work. We have great conversations. I mean, we went into it for about half an hour earlier in the week. It was great, you know? And so I think people are just used to Christians really having a hidden agenda. So if we're just totally upfront, this is who I am, love you, I think we'll be all right.
Several years ago here at TED, Peter Skillman introduced a design challenge called the Marshmallow Challenge. And the idea is pretty simple. Teams of 4 have to build the tallest freestanding structure out of 20 sticks of spaghetti, 1 yard of tape, 1 yard of string, and a marshmallow. And the marshmallow has to be on top. And though it seems really simple, it's actually pretty hard because it forces people to collaborate very quickly. And so I thought this was an interesting idea, and I incorporated it into a design workshop, and it was a huge success. And since then, I've conducted about 70 design workshops across the world with students and designers and architects, even the CTOs of the Fortune 50. And there's something about this exercise that reveals very deep lessons about the nature of collaboration, and I'd like to share some of them with you. So, normally, most people begin by orienting themselves to the task. They talk about it, they figure out what it's going to look like, they jockey for power, then they spend some time planning, organizing, they sketch in, they lay out spaghetti. They spend the majority of their time assembling the sticks into ever-growing structures, and then finally, just as they're running out of time, someone takes out the marshmallow, and then they gingerly put it on top, and they stand back, and ta-da! They admire their work. But what really happens most of the time is that the ta-da turns into an uh-oh, because the weight of the marshmallow causes the entire structure to buckle and to collapse. So there are a number of people who have a lot more uh-oh moments than others. And among the worst are recent graduates of business school. It's amazing. They lie, they cheat, they get distracted, and they produce really lame structures. And of course, there's teams that have a lot more ta-da structures. And among the best are recent graduates of kindergarten. And it's pretty amazing, as Peter tells us. Not only do they produce the tallest structures, but they're the most interesting structures of them all. So the question you want to ask is, how come? Why? What is it about them? And Peter likes to say that none of the kids spend any time trying to be CEO of Spaghetti Inc., right? They don't spend time jockeying for power. But there's another reason as well. And the reason is that business students are trained to find the single right plan, right? And then they execute on it. And then what happens is when they put the marshmallow on top, they run out of time, and what happens? It's a crisis. Sound familiar, right? Okay. What kindergartners do differently is that they start with the marshmallow and they build prototypes, successive prototypes, always keeping the marshmallow on top. So they have multiple times to fix, and they build prototypes along the way. So designers recognize this type of collaboration as the essence of the iterative process. And with each version, kids get instant feedback about what works and what doesn't work. So the capacity to play and prototype is really essential. But let's look at how different teams perform. So the average for most people is around 20 inches. Business school students, about half of that. Lawyers, a little better, but not much better than that. Kindergartens, better than most adults. Who does the very best? Architects and engineers, thankfully. And 39 inches is the tallest structure I've seen. And why is it? Because they understand triangles and self-reinforcing geometrical patterns are the key to building stable structures. So CEOs, a little bit better than average, but here's where it gets interesting. If you put an executive admin on the team, they get significantly better. It's incredible. You know, you look around, you go, oh, that team's going to win. You can just tell beforehand. And why is that? Because they have special skills of facilitation. They manage the process. They understand the process. And any team who manages and pays a close attention to work will significantly improve the team's performance. Specialized skills and facilitation skills, the combination leads to strong success. If you have 10 teams that typically perform, you'll get maybe 6 or so that have standing structures. And I tried something interesting. I thought, let's up the ante once. So I offered a $10,000 prize of software to the winning team. So what do you think happened to these design students? What was the result? Here's what happened. Not one team had a standing structure. Not one had, if anyone had built, say, a 1-inch structure, they would have taken home the prize. So isn't it interesting that high stakes have a strong impact? We did the exercise again with the same students. What do you think happened then? So now they understand the value of prototyping. So the same team went from being the very worst to being among the very best. They produced the tallest structures in the least amount of time. So there's deep lessons for us about the nature of incentives and success. So you might ask, why would anyone actually spend?
Check. I love doing this activity with people. Because I think it represents a whole lot about what we need to embody inside of Fresh Expressions. And I think just in the church in general, is that this learning how to prototype here, just 7 weeks. That was our way of trying to prototype. Of saying, let's be honest and let's just put the marshmallow on top of a very small structure and let it collapse if it has to. But we're still going to build something up. And if that prototype works, let's just build it up even higher. I have made many mistakes with Fresh Expressions, and one of the most important learnings has been this. And so, you know, like as you go out today, maybe you're really excited about starting something. Remember this challenge, even though it's a spaghetti marshmallow tower challenge. Show grace to yourself. Allow yourself time for it to develop. Allow yourself time for the marshmallow, and the opportunity for the marshmallow to fall off and to learn something from it. This is new territory, and we call you pioneers. We call these people pioneers for a reason, is that they're going into places that are just uncharted. We don't really know exactly what it's going to look like. And so the more we're able to live into this, the less pressure we have inside of our own souls, inside of our own being, and I believe that's going to result in more meaningful work. Okay, are you ready to kind of close us out? I only wanted to if days like this are a lot. We've thrown a lot of information at you. You've been extremely generous with your time and your attention. If there's anything I can encourage you to, is to pick one thing and do it. Don't try to pick 20. Days like this can often feel like trying to drink out of a fire hydrant. And so I would say if there's one thing that you need to do, whether it's I need to listen well, I need to call that potential pioneer, I need to have a cup of coffee with this person, I need to try something, I need to go and explore a third space. I'm not sure what it is. I need to go and let this sucker fly and see how it goes, and put that marshmallow on top. I need to let go some of my control and let somebody else potentially fall down. I would say pick one thing and see if you could really, really implement it. And over time, you'll remember different things we've talked about through the day.